Intuition, the voice only we can hear. Have you ever felt like you should turn onto a different street, even though you didn't feel like it? Or had a feeling something bad was going to happen, and then a moment later your hunch was proven right? Intuition, a quiet whisper that flows from deep within us. An invisible force that does not speak directly, does not explain, does not show evidence. And yet sometimes we simply know. Why does it happen that we make decisions against logic, and then it turns out that it was the only right path? In this episode, we will travel to a world that cannot be measured or weighed, to the realm of the subconscious, spirituality, and unexplainable phenomena. We will tell the stories of people who owe their lives to their own intuition. We will look at scientific research that tries to capture the fleeting, and we will ask, is intuition really just a quick analysis of our brain, or something much deeper? Stay with us, because what we discover today could change the way you make decisions, and maybe save you in a moment when you don't know why, but you just feel it. Part 1. When a premonition saves a life. On a September morning in the year 2001, Elena Gonzalez, an American lawyer from New York, was getting ready for work in her office on the 90th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. It was supposed to be a completely ordinary day, but something was different. She woke up with a strange feeling of unease, not fear, but a deep conviction that she shouldn't go to work. She didn't have a fever, nothing hurt, but the feeling was so strong that she decided to stay home. A few hours later, the world held its breath. A plane hit the tower, beginning one of the most tragic chapters of modern history. Elena survived, because something told her not to leave her house. What was that voice? Where did it come from? This is just one of dozens of cases where people can't explain why they changed their plans at the last minute, thus avoiding disaster. A similar story was told by an Italian tourist who was supposed to board Alaska Airlines Flight 801 in January 2000. The night before the flight, he had a dream about a dramatic plane crash. He woke up in a sweat, and even though he rationally knew that dreams were just dreams, abandoned the trip. The plane crashed a few hours later. Everyone on board died. Sometimes such premonitions appear in trivial situations. Someone does not get into a car because something does not feel right, and then finds out that the vehicle has had a serious accident. Scientists talk about subconscious data processing. Our minds analyze thousands of micro details that we are not aware of. And intuition is the result of this silent analysis. But can everything really be explained by chemistry and neurons alone? Because how do you explain that a mother in Australia woke up in the middle of the night with intense anxiety about her child, who was staying with grandparents a few hundred kilometers away? She called immediately. A rescue operation was underway at that very moment, because the child was having a shortness of breath. Is it just a coincidence? Part 2. Intuition in the shadow of science and medicine. Professor Ignác Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician in the 19th century, observed a disturbing correlation. In the Viennese hospital where he worked, the mortality rate among women after childbirth was significantly higher in the ward run by doctors than in the one where midwives worked. No one could find a rational explanation, but Semmelweis had a strong hunch. Something was wrong with the doctor's hands. Even though the germ theory did not yet exist, he recommended washing their hands in a chlorine solution. The result? The number of deaths dropped dramatically. His colleagues ridiculed him, but his intuition saved thousands of lives. In turn, Dr. William Stewart Halsted, considered the father of modern surgery in the United States, introduced in the 19th century not only surgical gloves, but also a number of aseptic procedures, based not on hard evidence, but on an inner conviction that every patient should be operated on in the cleanest possible conditions. This seems obvious today, but at the time it was revolutionary. It was no different with the Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan, who claimed that he received his complicated mathematical formulas in a dream from a goddess. Although he had no formal education, his equations astounded British professors. The notes he left are still analyzed by mathematicians today and often turn out to be surprisingly accurate. How is this possible? Intuition often precedes science, directing scientists onto paths that they are not yet able to justify with research. It is often this that gives the impulse to an experiment that no one else would dare to conduct. Some would call it a brilliant hunch, others pure chance. But does chance explain everything? Part 3. A voice from another dimension? In the world of the paranormal, intuition is not just a psychological phenomenon, but is sometimes interpreted as a connection with something invisible. Dutch medium Elise van Rijn claims that intuition is the first step to contact with the so-called spiritual world. In her opinion, premonitions are not the inner voice of our subconscious, but subtle signals from entities that exist outside of time and space. Since childhood, Elise has experienced states that doctors describe as perceptual disturbances, but over time she has learned to use them to warn people of misfortune before it happens. Similar beliefs also appear among Amazonian shamans, who consider intuition to be the effect of inner hearing. According to them, a person who is able to quiet down and clear their mind begins to receive messages not only from their own interior, but also from the energy of the world around them. However, this is not the voice of reason, but the quiet speech of the soul, available only to those who have rejected the chaos of everyday life. In the United States, in the 1960s, parapsychological experiments were conducted with people who claimed to be able to sense danger before it happened. The so-called Stargate project tested the phenomenon of remote viewing, the ability to learn information about distant places without being physically present. The results were ambiguous, but some of the tests gave surprisingly accurate answers. It also happens that people experience intuition in situations that have no rational justification, when a deceased loved one appears in their thoughts and leads them to a decision that turns out to be right. Is this just the effect of mourning and emotions, or is it something more? Part 4. Intuition at breakthrough moments in history. In July 1940, Winston Churchill made a decision that changed the course of Europe. Although most of his advisors were pushing for negotiations with Germany, he was unwavering in his belief that Britain should fight to the end. He later admitted that something inside him was screaming at him not to surrender, something he could neither name nor back up with any analysis. His determination was the beginning of a resistance that changed the course of the war. It wasn't just politicians who listened to their inner voices. Maria Skłodowska-Curie, while conducting her pioneering research on radioactivity, often made risky research decisions based on intuition. Sometimes she chose one of the directions of an experiment without a clear theoretical basis, guided by a hunch that the answer was there. Her choices, as it turned out later, often led to breakthroughs. In antiquity, there were also many moments in which intuition shaped history. Julius Caesar, standing on the banks of the Rubicon, uttered the words, "The die is cast," but his earlier behavior betrayed an internal struggle. Biographers mention a long silence and deep contemplation before crossing the border, as if something was holding him back or pushing him to act. Was this reflection, or perhaps a premonition, that he was changing history? There are many such examples. Napoleon, who avoided traveling in a specific carriage. Abraham Lincoln, who just before his death had a prophetic dream about his funeral. Or Tadeusz Kościuszko, who, despite the military superiority of his opponent, trusted not so much the analysis, but rather his personal feeling of the situation in the Battle of Rakowicz. Intuition has accompanied great leaders, scientists, and even chieftains. Is it a coincidence that they had the courage to listen to something that could not be proven? Part 5. The brain, the mind, and the mystery. Modern neurobiology has been trying to capture the essence of the phenomenon that most people call intuition for years. Professor Antonio Damasio, a renowned brain researcher, noticed that many decisions that we consider rational are actually made at an emotional level, before we even realize their meaning. In his studies, people with damage to the centers responsible for emotions had great difficulty making even the simplest decisions, even though their logical abilities remained intact. This suggests that intuition may be a deeply rooted biological mechanism. From a psychological perspective, intuition is a process of unconscious information processing. Our brain registers thousands of stimuli, glances, gestures, tone of voice, small changes in the environment that do not reach our consciousness, but influence our feelings and reactions. When we suddenly feel something, it is often the effect of these microsignals, processed in a fraction of a second. But some researchers go further. For example, Dr. Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist and author of books on so-called emotional intuition, believes that there are people who are especially sensitive to the subtle energy fields of others. This is not some mystical ability, but an intense empathy that allows you to sense intentions or moods before they are expressed in words. In neurology, there is also a phenomenon known as the gut reaction. Our viscera, sometimes called the second brain, have their own nervous system that communicates with the brain via the vagus nerve. It is this area that is often active when we feel something in our gut, despite the lack of logical premises. Although science explains many things, intuition still eludes clear description. It is like a shadow, ever present but difficult to grasp. Part 6. When should you trust your intuition? Each of us has faced a decision we couldn't justify at some point, and yet knew what to do. But is intuition always worth trusting? Is that inner voice a reliable guide, or does it sometimes lead us astray? Cognitive psychologists like Daniel Kahneman warn against so-called heuristic errors. These are mental shortcuts that help us act quickly, but can lead to false conclusions. When we make decisions based on intuition, we often rely on previous experiences that, while similar, do not always apply to the new situation. In other words, intuition can fail us, especially when it operates in isolation from the facts. However, there are situations in which intuition proves invaluable. Paramedics, firefighters, and experienced pilots often say that in critical moments, they made decisions quickly, without analysis, and thanks to that, they saved lives. Their intuition was not accidental, however. It was nourished by years of experience, thousands of hours of observation, and countless borderline situations. In everyday life, intuition can also be helpful, especially in interpersonal relationships. When something is off in someone's behavior, even though everything seems fine, it often turns out that our hunches were based on something. In such moments, it is worth trusting yourself, not as a mystical medium, but as a person who has unconsciously received subtle signals. At the same time, one must be careful not to confuse intuition with fear, prejudice, or emotional reflex. Fear-based hunches can be deceptive because they are not guided by reality, but by internal chaos. Intuition can be an ally, but like any sense, it requires awareness and training. Otherwise, it becomes just noise. Intuition, the silent companion of everyday choices, an invisible force that sometimes leads us where logic cannot reach. Is it just the effect of the brain processing information quickly? Or is it something much deeper, a sense that we cannot yet measure? We have seen how hunches save lives, inspire great discoveries, and influence decisions that change the course of history. But we have also seen that this inner voice can be deceptive if we do not know how to listen to it. Is what we call intuition simply wisdom hidden in our subconscious? Or perhaps an echo of something greater, an incomprehensible, extra-rational contact with a reality that we do not yet understand? One thing is certain: intuition exists. Regardless of whether we believe in it or not, it influences our decisions, thoughts, and emotions. That is why it is worth observing it, learning to recognize it, and distinguishing it from the chaos of emotions or fears. What about you? Have you ever trusted your intuition and been right? Or maybe your gut feeling let you down? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you like, and see you soon.